Hello everyone, welcome to Lit Studio by Karishma. So today in this class we are going to talk about Julia Kristeva and her role as a postmodernist thinker. So in postmodernism we have given a brief introduction to the theory of postmodernism and how it's different from modernism, and we've also talked about Jean Baudrillard, who is considered as the high priest of postmodernism as well. If you haven't watched those videos, please make sure you go back and watch those videos and then come back to Julia Kristeva so you can understand what postmodernism is all about, and also why are her concepts so important in relation to postmodernist theory. Now let's look at Julia Kristeva. She, although we are discussing her in particular with the theory of postmodernism, she is also played a very crucial role in the theory of feminism and also in the theory of psychoanalysis. And she is a Bulgarian French philosopher. You should remember that. Now, let's look at certain books that she has written. The first book would be Word, Dialogue, and Novel. Word, Dialogue, and Novel. The second book is Revolution in Poetic Language. Revolution in Poetic Language. The third book is Power of Horror, an essay on abjection. Abjection is one of her important concepts as well. We'll be looking about that shortly in this video. And then her fourth book is Desire in Language. Her fifth book is Marriage as a Fine Art. Her sixth book is Maladies of the Soul. And her seventh book is about Chinese women. So these are the books that she has written. Now let's jump right into her important concept, which is intertextuality. So what do you understand by the term intertextuality? Inter means within, textuality, within the text. Like there is certain similarity between the text. It is made up of two words, inter and textuality. Intertextuality is within two. If there are common things in a text and some other text, then we consider that particular feature to be intertextual. And there is this other concept called intratextual. So that talks about the features within the text, within a single particular text. So the concept that Julia Kristeva has given is intertextuality. So the term was first used by Julia Kristeva, and the term is derived from Saussure's sign and Bakhtin's dialogism. If you remember Saussure's sign and Bakhtin's dialogism, we've already dealt with Saussure and Bakhtin in our earlier classes. If you have not watched them yet, please make sure you watch those classes as well. So this particular term that she has given, intertextuality, is actually derived from Saussure's sign and Bakhtin's dialogism. So what does the term intertextuality mean? It is finding references or how a text interacts with another text. Finding references, if there are particular references of a text within another text, that you can consider as being intertextual, or else you can see how a text interacts with another text as well. For example, if there is a kind of commentary made on a text in another text, if there is a critical analysis of a text in a particular work, that is also called intertextuality. So if there are any references used, or if there are any kind of interaction being made between a text and another work, that is called intertextuality. According to Kristeva, any text is a site of interaction of numberless texts existing only with its relation to other texts. So Julia Kristeva is of the belief that any text exists due to its relationship with the other text. Any text is a site of an interaction of numberless texts. A text, if you observe a particular text, it need not be in relationship, or it need not be intertextual to one particular text. A text can acquire its references from n number of texts as well. So you cannot say a text is related to one particular text. There can be multiple references, there can be multiple interactions that can be made within a single text, and it exists only with its relation to the other text. So the text exists because the interactions that are made exist. So for example, if you observe a text that is intertextual with Hamlet, that is intertextual with Dr. Faustus, that is intertextual with Spanish tragedy. The text exists because all the other texts, Hamlet, Spanish tragedy, and Dr. Faustus, exist. If those three texts do not exist, obviously this particular text that we are looking into right now would not have existed. So that is what Julia Kristeva says about intertextuality. So one text interacts with numerous other texts. That is the key concept of intertextuality. One text need not be interacted to just one particular text. It need not limit its interaction with one particular text. It can be interacting with multiple texts at the same time. So this is the image. For example, one book can be intertextual with multiple texts at a single time. This idea is quite similar to what Barthes has said. A text is a tissue of numerous quotations. So quotations is a text taking its lines from other texts. A text is quoting what is said in other texts. So it is a tissue. It is nothing but a text is nothing but a tissue of numerous quotations, and it is a fluid. So it flows in many directions. He says that this quality is very fluid, so it doesn't limit its direction to one way, but it flows in multiple directions. That is, it keeps on having many levels of meaning. So the levels of meaning, if you observe any particular text, if you read that text in a particular moment, you can make one kind of interpretation, but that does not end the meaning of it. When you read it in a certain other time, you can interpret that text in a completely different way. If you ask your friend to read that text, and they might interpret in a completely different way than you have interpreted the earlier times. So the levels of meaning are countless. That is what Barthes says. It is very fluid in nature, so the directions do not limit. The directions are multiple, and there are many levels to the meaning. That is what Barthes said, and Julia Kristeva's idea of intertextuality is kind of similar to what Barthes had said. Julia Kristeva, in her intertextuality, says that a text is a weave of codes. So what does it mean? A weave of codes means a text has multiple codes, and a text is weaved with using those codes, so that there is intricate connection between everything that is happening in the text. The codes are interconnected so well, and it makes the meaning. A text is a weave of codes from other texts and other discourses. So a text is a weave of codes. Whenever a text is using a reference from another text, so it is using that particular code in this text, and or it may use not just a text or other discourses. So a text is actually a weave. It is using them to make the interconnection. So that is what Kristeva says. So it's simply, one text doesn't only relate to one another text, but to many discourses like history and philosophy. For example, if you are talking about a particular text in literature, it might not just be connected with literature. For example, if you observe any of Shakespeare's historical plays, it is said to have influenced by Roman plays. So although it is a part of literature, it is also connected to history. So it is not just being intertextual to other piece of literature which is a common field, but to other discourses as well, like history. Or we can even find so many texts that are philosophical in nature. So even though they belong to literature, they're also finding their similarity in other discourse like philosophy. So that is what Kristeva says. So it is related to other texts and to many other discourses like history and philosophy. Kristeva believed that every text is a signifying system and rejected the notion of making meaning solely through the intention of the author. It is quite similar to the concept of death of the author. She also rejected the idea that the author's intention is superior, so you should make meaning by solely reading the text and not go after the intention of the author. So she says it's a signifying system, so it is by itself autonomic in nature, so it gives out its own interpretation, it gives out its own meaning for the reader to interpret it himself, so it should not go after the intention of the author. The concept of intertextuality dramatically blurs the outline of the book. So when you observe the intertextuality, when you are going through the concept of intertextuality, it thereby blurs the concept that there is this margin to this particular book, this book ends here. No, the meaning continues even in the next book as well, because whenever you are reading a text that is making reference to Hamlet or Macbeth, the meaning of the text doesn't confine within the text but also goes on to Hamlet and Macbeth as well. So it is not the outline of the text that makes the meaning. The concept of intertextuality blurs the outline of the text. Julia Kristeva says a book is limitless and not bound by its margins. So now I hope the concept of intertextuality is quite clear to you. So intertextuality majorly talks about comparing and contrasting one text to another text, using the philosophies of different branches and knowledge to interpret the text. So that is what we've talked about. We can use the knowledge that we have known through like philosophy, history, and all such discourses to make your own meaning out of the text. Reader's own experiences from life, previous readings, and his idea of the world around him is also going to affect the meaning of the text. It's not just the text that is going to make the meaning, but it is also the reader, because if I have undergone certain experiences in my life, I would interpret a text in a certain way, and you who might not have undergone the same circumstances in your life might interpret that text in a particularly different way. But that doesn't mean your meaning is wrong and my meaning is right, or my meaning is wrong and your meaning is right. That is the reason why the reader's own interpretation of the text is depending on his own experiences and his life's previous meanings, his idea of the world around him, and also all of this is going to affect the meaning of the text. So these are the important features of intertextuality. Now let's look at the concept of CHORA. This concept is particularly in relation with the feministic studies, but it is also kind of related to psychoanalysis as well. So you should just remember the fact that the concept of CHORA is given by Julia Kristeva. So Kristeva derived the concept of CHORA from Plato. According to Plato, CHORA is a nourishing maternal space. He says that it is a maternal space which gives nourishment. So Kristeva has actually derived the concept of CHORA from what Plato has given. So Kristeva's idea of CHORA can be interpreted in many ways. It can be seen as the uterus. Some look at CHORA as the uterus of the woman's body because it's a safe and nourishing space for the baby. CHORA could even be perceived as a metaphor for the kind of relationship existing between a mother and a child, or it could even be referred to the temporary period before the mirror stage, that is between 0 to 6 months of the baby. That could also be considered the CHORA of CHORA. So it can be referred to uterus. It can even be referred to the kind of relationship between the mother and the child, especially during the mirror stage. And now let's look at another important concept given by Julia Kristeva, that is symbolic and semiotic space. So it is a key concept given by Kristeva. It is divided signification in two parts. So symbolic and semiotic space has divided signification or meaning making in especially two parts, that is symbolic and semiotic. So these are the particular stages that Kristeva has talked about. According to Kristeva, the semiotic is closely related to CHORA. The 0 to 6 months that we've talked about, when the child is in CHORA, that is the semiotic space. In the earlier stages of his or her life, the infant is very emotional and is tied to their instincts. So whenever we look at a baby who is just 0 to 6 months old, if they want to squeeze something, they squeeze it. If they want to pull your hair out, they will pull it out. They will not be thinking about the consequences of it. So they, especially in the 0 to 6 months, that is when the baby is in the semiotic space, they will be based solely on their emotions. So they are very emotional in nature. There is absence of language. You don't see a 0 to 6 months baby speaking, so there is obviously language is not present. It's a stage from 0 to 6 months of the child. It is a realm of music, rhythm and poetry. This realm, that is the semiotic space, is often associated to music, rhythm and poetry. If you observe these qualities, they are especially feminine in nature. In this stage, the child cannot understand logic and reason. So obviously, when there is no language or nothing present, there is no kind of understanding of consequences. There is no reasoning in the child's mind. There would not be presence of logic and reason. So there's no structured meaning to anything. So the child would not be making meaning just by associating the things that are happening around him. In this stage, the child is dependent mostly on his emotions. Emotions are tied to feminine. So in this particular stage, that is the semiotic phase, the child is particularly associated with feminine nature. And although he might be a boy, he might be a girl, the child is said to be in feminine stage. It is semiotic phase. So the semiotic space is often associated to CHORA. And the time period we've talked about is 0 to 6 months of the baby. After 6 months, the child enters mirror stage. So in mirror stage, the child is able to look at mirror and identify that it is him. So he would form an identity to himself. In the mirror stage, the child will be able to form an identity of himself. So in this stage, he learns to distinguish himself from others. So when he is unable to reason, when he is unable to do any kind of logical meaning, when there is no language present, when there is no structured meaning to anything, then obviously the child would not be able to make this distinction between other people and himself. So in this particular stage, that is after 6 months, when the child enters mirror stage, he can make that distinction and he would be able to give a certain identity to himself. He enters in the realm of shared cultural identity, which is called symbolic space. So after 6 months of the child's birth, he would be entering into the mirror stage, which is also called a symbolic space. So in this space, the child would be able to enter into a shared cultural identity. What does shared cultural identity mean? For example, if a child is born into a Telugu speaking community, obviously that is a shared cultural identity. That is, it is a Telugu speaking community, it is a Hindi speaking community. So when he is able to speak a language, when he is able to give out meaning, he would be associating himself into that particular stage of shared cultural identity. That is, if he can speak Telugu, he will be associated with the Telugu speaking community, or Hindi to Hindi speaking community. So that is what happens in the mirror stage. Kristeva describes symbolic as a space in which development of language allows the child to become a speaking subject and to develop a sense of identity that is completely separate from the mother. So till now, that is till 0 to 6 months, that is in the semiotic space, the child often associates or identifies himself with the identity of the mother. But in this particular stage, that is in the symbolic space, the child often creates his own identity that is separate from his mother. The process of separation of the child from his own mother is called abjection. We've talked about one of Kristeva's books, and we've talked about this particular concept called abjection. Abjection is simply the separation, the process in which there is separation of identity between the child and the mother's identity. It is called abjection. So when does that abjection happen? Abjection happens in the symbolic space. That is after the language develops, that is after 6 months of the child's birth. So that is symbolic space and semiotic space. In the symbolic stage, we often see the characteristics of symbolic stage being contrasted with the characteristics of semiotic stage. So simply we've talked about how semiotic stage is often associated with, music, emotions and rhythm, and it is feminine in nature and it lacks structure and meaning. Symbolic space represents masculinity. Semiotic space represents feminine and symbolic space represents masculine nature. And symbolic space is also represented with structured meaning or cultural meaning of language. But in semiotic stage, we see that it lacks the structural meaning of the language. Kristeva suggests that the mother's body mediates between the CHORA and the symbolic stage. For example, the common thing that is present between the 0 to 6 months of the baby, that is in the semiotic stage, and between the stage when he enters the mirror stage, when he is trying to make a separate identity from his mother, the mother acts as a bridge between these particular stages for that transition to happen in a smooth way. The shift from semiotic to symbolic doesn't happen overnight. Obviously, this grand of a change would not take place in a overnight. The child would not wake up one day and think, okay, I associate myself completely differently. I have this particular identity. I can speak this language very well. So it happens gradually. It is an ongoing process. In fact, even sometimes, even after coming out of that semiotic phase, that is, even when we come out of our identity with our mother and make our own identity, some children often go back to that particular identity where they associated with their mother, where they associated their identity with their mother's identity. So that is what the concept of CHORA, symbolic and semiotic stage, and the concept of abjection is all about. I hope everything that we've covered in this class is quite clear to you. The class notes of this particular class would be available on my Telegram channel, and the link would be provided in the description box below. So kindly check that out as well. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please make sure you subscribe to the channel. And thank you.